Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. I'm honored today to be revealing the September release from Colorado Craft Company. There are 5 new stamp sets, starting out with these 2 called Witches, Monkeys, and Pumpkin Cutie. Both of those are adorable. It has their kind of lovely legs style on these where you just see the legs of the characters. I really love the greetings on that Pumpkin Cutie one too. And then there are 3 large 6x6 stamp sets that are all Halloween themed: Jack-o'-lantern, haunted house, and witch's hat. I think all of these look absolutely fantastic. I'm going to be focusing on just one of these stamp sets today, and make sure you stay tuned to the very end of the video because there is a big giveaway and I want to let you guys know about that, but stay tuned. It's going to include giving away all of these stamp sets. So today I'm going to be creating both a mail art envelope and a card. Now this card is 5x7, so my envelope will accommodate a 5x7 card, and I'm going to be watercoloring on that envelope. So I'm going to use an envelope punch board, or the 123 punch board from We Are Memory Keepers, to make an envelope out of watercolor paper. According to the chart on the tool itself, it says I need watercolor paper that's 9 7/8. So because it's larger than my regular 9x12 paper would accommodate, I'm using this really big pad of watercolor paper that's really large, and I trimmed it down and then cut it to a 9 7/8 square inch watercolor paper. So now I'm using the punch board. It said to line it up at 4 1/8. So I've lined up that top left corner at 4 1/8, punched, and then use that bottom score line on the right with the bone folder that comes with the tool. I'll rotate that, line up my score line that I just added with that far left point on the punch. It also has a groove line where the score line kind of settles into it. I'll punch that and then add another score line. So I'm going to do this 2 more times as I rotate this watercolor paper to the left or counterclockwise. And I'm making sure that that score line that I have, when it rotates to the left, it falls right into that groove. So after I have all 4 sides scored and punched, that gives me the perfectly sized 5x7 envelope. Now this is actually a little bit larger than a regular 5x7 envelope, but it does accommodate a 5x7 card, so it's the perfect size. So I'm folding up those flaps just so I can get an idea of what this envelope looks like, and then I've placed it inside a MISTI stamp positioning tool. I'm going to position this large jack-o'-lantern stamp sort of at a diagonal coming in from the left side of the envelope. I want this jack-o'-lantern to be kind of bleeding off the edge of that corner, and it'll just give it a little bit more of a dynamic look on the envelope. Using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a pigment ink, and I ended up stamping this a couple times. The watercolor paper, even though it's not super thick and super textured, it does still have a little bit of texture on it, and it just wasn't picking up the line of this stamp quite as well. So I did end up adding some additional ink onto that stamp and then stamping it one more time, and that gave me a really nice crisp impression, and I was able to move on. I decided to go ahead and coat this black ink with clear embossing powder. So I'm going to sprinkle on some embossing powder from Ranger, and the clear embossing powder is going to give a little bit of a barrier for when I start painting, and it's just going to help guide the paint into all of those little areas. Sprinkling on that clear embossing powder and then shaking off the excess. And then I took a heat tool to this entire piece, and this is going to smooth and melt all of that clear embossing powder, and it also really intensifies the black color of that ink that's underneath. It makes it really intense and inky and very, very black. I think it looks really amazing. I don't know why I don't do this often, but I really love putting clear embossing powder over black ink. I now have some black cardstock. This is Licorice Twist cardstock, and I've cut it to be 5.5 by 7.5, so larger than a 5x7 card, and that's so that I can trim it down later to the perfect size. So I'm going to be doing some heat embossing on the black cardstock, so I'm prepping it with an anti-static powder tool. This powder tool just takes away any of the static cling that might cause the embossing powder to stick to areas where I don't want it. I then stamped the jack-o'-lantern in Versamark ink, And I just walked my fingers over that large stamp to make sure I got a really good impression. I then took my cardstock piece here and I sprinkled on some alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. This is a very finely milled, detailed embossing powder. It's great for images like this. And I shook off the excess and then hit it with my heat tool until it was smooth and melted. I'm going to do some colored pencils on my card here. I'm going to actually speed up the coloring process here, but I will talk you through a little bit of it just so you have an idea of how I did all my coloring. So I started out by adding some white to areas where I wanted it to be the most light. And then I came in with kind of a brighter yellow-orange. And I colored over the entire pumpkin with this orange shade. I then brought in an even darker orange, and I added that to kind of around the line areas where I wanted there to be a little bit more color, and also the interior pieces on the mouth and the eyes. I brought in some more white just to intensify the bright areas. And then I went over all of the white areas with the darker orange shade once again. That just takes away some of that really white cast that it leaves. I took a bright yellow and filled in the interior areas on the eyes and the mouth and the nose. This just makes it look like there's a candle inside the jack-o'-lantern and it's glowing from within. So now I'm going to take some green shades and color in the leaves and then a brown on that stem. I'm going to coat that with a little bit of green. And then I took that same brown shade and added kind of like a ground, like a dirt ground underneath the pumpkin. I took a number 10 Jelly Roll white pen, so a nice thick lined pen, and added some stars. It could be a snowy night if you have snow in your forecast on Halloween, but I really was going for more a nighttime sky for this. So then I took the A7 layer dies from Waffle Flower and I grabbed one of the larger ones. I think this is the third from the largest size. And I positioned that on my piece here and just used a little bit of washi tape to hold that down while I ran it through my Gemini die cutting machine. I have a white card base here that's 5x7 and I use some foam adhesive to put my colored piece directly onto the front of the card base. So the last thing to do for this card is to add a greeting. So I'm going to grab some lavender cardstock from Simon Says Stamp, and I use the Happy Halloween greeting stamp from that stamp set, and I'm going to heat emboss it. I'm going to use that anti-static powder tool to prep the cardstock, and then I used Versamark ink for the stamping of the actual greeting. So I'm going to stamp that down, and then I'm going to take out the cardstock and sprinkle on some more white embossing powder. Like I mentioned before, this is alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. I tapped off the excess and then used my heat tool to heat set this until it was smooth and melted. I used my scissors to trim this down into two separate pieces. And then I decided that that lavender cardstock shade wasn't quite as intense as I wanted. So I took some Wilted Violet Distress ink and an ink blending tool and just added more of this purple shade right over the top. The embossing powder is slick and so it doesn't grab onto the ink. It kind of repels it. So it looks perfect and I just have a more intense purple cardstock. I used some foam adhesive on the back. And I just adhered this directly onto the front of the card, kind of at a skewed angle on these so it looks a little bit more playful for Halloween. And that's going to finish that first card. I'm going to go back to the watercolor envelope now. And I'm going to be using some Magello Mission Gold watercolor paints today. This is my big palette that I really, really love. And I'm going to do a little bit of prep work before we get into the painting. I've got some drawing gum here. This is a liquid masking fluid. And I'm going to protect the areas around the very edges of the pumpkin and also the stem and leaves. I'm going to be adding a pretty intense background. And I knew it would just be a whole lot easier to paint this background quickly if I didn't have to worry about being very fussy around the pumpkin itself. So this is going to really help me make sure I get a nice clean edge on all of this. So I let that drawing gum completely dry, and then I brought in some clean water. So I'm going to be creating kind kind of a little more intense, moody Halloween background. And originally I was just going to have it be, some purples to like a purple violet to a pink and a blue shade. And the more I started painting, the more I really wanted to make this look like a very moody nighttime sky or a galaxy. And I've shown this technique multiple times over the years. This is my favorite way to do it, where you do a very colorful underpainting and you dry that. And then you come in with black paint over the top and you kind of water down your brush a little bit, really spread out that black paint, kind of paint in kind of a cloud-like texture as you go around this entire area. And then you're going to take a heat tool and dry it once again, or just let it air dry. And then you're left with sort of this kind of black cloud-like texture with color peeking out from underneath. To make it look like a galaxy, I'm using some white gouache paint, which I've diluted with a little bit of water. And then I'm flicking that off the edge of an acrylic block, just so I have a little bit more control over where that splatter goes. After all of that was dry, I can now remove the drying gum. And this just peels up from that watercolor paper. And I love this part. It doesn't happen often when you can kind of peel up all in one piece, but it is really satisfying to do this part. And I love how it protects everything underneath. I have a nice clean line on that pumpkin, and I really think it was worth the extra effort it took to paint on that drying gum. So now I'm coming in with some different orange shades to paint this jack-o'-lantern. I started with a little bit more of a yellow-orange shade, similar to how I colored the colored pencil version of this pumpkin. So I'm bringing in kind of a lighter orange first layer of paint, and then while it's still a little bit wet, I'm bringing in a more intense orange, going around those lines where it would have a little bit more color, similar to how I colored it with colored pencils. So I'm adding that in, kind of spreading that color around. And then I'm going to work on the interior pieces of the pumpkin. I'm just going to add a little bit of that yellow-orange shade on those areas for the jack-o'-lantern. And then I came in with a green shade, actually a couple green shades, a kind of a very normal green. And then I came in with a little bit of a darker bluish teal, and just to add a little more interest on those leaves and the stem. So now I'm going to dry this entire jack-o'-lantern area, and I'm making sure that I don't stay in any area for a particularly long time because I don't want to remelt the clear embossing powder that I put over the stamping. So now I'm bringing in kind of a reddish orange brown shade. I mixed some brown with some orange and came up with this a little bit darker shade. I'm adding those to the darkest areas on the pumpkin just to add a little bit more interest. And I'm not making this a really smoothly painted piece. I'm kind of taking cues from the actual stamp image itself, which has a lot of like rough edges and very sketchy lines. So I'm letting the painting look a little bit rough. I did paint yellow on the interior of the mouth, nose, and eyes, and I also added a little bit of shading using that same brown-orange shade. But you'll see here in a minute that I end up actually painting those areas black. So I'm going to remove my piece from my hardboard here. I taped it down earlier and protected the flaps on the envelope. And this is always one of the most satisfying parts of painting with watercolors, is removing the masking tape to reveal that nice clean edge. So I decided to go ahead and fill in the eyes just so I could get a different look. On the first card with the colored pencils, I had more of a glowing look from inside the jack-o'-lantern, but on this one I wanted it to be black, sort of like it looks like it hasn't been lit up with a candle inside yet. So after that was dry, actually it was still drying as I did this part, I was just super careful, I brought in some postage stamps. These are some forever stamps from the US Postal Service and also one vintage stamp. Now I probably didn't need all of this postage, but I chose Halloween-esque kind of pumpkin stamps and also this Sleepy Hollow vintage stamp here on the end. It was much more for aesthetic purposes than it was just for postage. I probably could have got by with just one stamp, maybe two, but I really like the additional element of having four. Now I realized that I would need a darker area for the address because that galaxy background was quite busy right there. So I decided to do kind of a very dry brush stroke technique over this area where I'm going to have the address. So I'm just using some black paint from my palette, and I dried that with my heat tool, and then it came in with a white gel pen. This is the same gel pen I used for the stars on the card. And while it was a really nice look, I realized that with that dark black paint underneath, it was sort of eating away at the bright white of this Gelly Roll pen. And this is the first time I've ever really had a problem with using a Gelly Roll pen over black or dark watercolor paint. I'm not sure why this day in particular, it wasn't really as bright white as it usually is. But because it ended up doing that, I decided to come in with some gouache with a very, very small brush. This is a size 0 Prado brush from Escada. And I just painted over what I'd written with my white gel pen. This is going to brighten up those letters and make sure that it's completely legible. And I like to do this when I'm kind of concerned about making sure that the address is completely easily read. I want to make sure that there isn't anything that might slow down the delivery of this envelope. By the way, Dawn did give me permission to use her address on a mailer envelope, so thank you so much, Dawn. If you want to submit your address for consideration on future mailer envelopes, make sure you click on the link down in the video description. You'll fill out a giveaway form and a mailer form, and I do have a new form every month, so that keeps the addresses up to date. So I'm now using a stamp that I made using my Silhouette Mint machine. This is a custom stamp. And then I dried that address. Excuse me, the last thing to do is to put the envelope together. It's actually not the very last. I've got a couple things to do, but this is one of the last steps. I used some adhesive from Lawn Fawn. This is a really, really strong tape adhesive. And I put that just on the side areas of the bottom flap. And then I folded up that bottom flap and pressed it down onto the side flaps. And that adheres the envelope together. And I have my envelope assembled. So now I need to protect all of that watercolor painting that I did earlier. So I'm going to use some Distress Glaze, and I'm using a Ranger foam blending tool for this. It fits perfectly inside the jar of Distress Glaze, and I'm using this to apply the Distress Glaze over the entire area. I'm going to go over all of my watercolor painting, including the address, but I am going to skip the postage stamps. That's because this Distress Glaze gives a very slick surface. If you've ever seen it on any projects after it's dry, it actually repels water. Like water beads up on the surface. And so it doesn't allow for the Postal Service to cancel those postage stamps, so it is best to not put the Distress Glaze over the postage stamps. After the glaze was applied, I used a clean paper towel to buff away any of the excess, and then that envelope is completely finished. So, like I said before, there is a big giveaway for this video here. Since I did get to reveal all 5 of the new stamp sets from Colorado Craft Company, they are giving away 5 packs of the stamps to 5 lucky winners. So if you want to enter the giveaway to win any of these stamps, make sure you check out the info down below in the video description or over at my blog, and you'll have a chance to win a pack of all of these stamps. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure you check out the links down below so you know where you can purchase the stamps you've seen today, as well as any other supply that you've seen me use. On the screen, I've got 3 more videos for you to check out. I hope you'll click through and get a little bit more card inspiration today. And thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And I will see you very soon for another card video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.